There was a marked decline of students who reported at their respective schools across the country, as parents who are at the mercy of the extortionate power of school boards could barely meet their children's school dues. In an ailing economy which is yet to rebound from the COVID-19 pandemic, amid the rising cost of living, there are fears that some parents already saddled with debt will only sink further into the clutches of loan sharks.
So many schools are hijacking the school fees in millions. I'm of the view that the government should come and regulate this, because the children of the poor people will not study. And once these people don't study, they will become a problem to this country, because they will be looking for their survival.
I may not recommend anyone to take his or her children in a government school. Yes.
So parents don't really have a choice. Is that what you're saying?
They don't have a choice. You either go to UPE, USE, you cannot even take a student at Makerere University, a government entity or a government university. Fees or tuition is completely high.
Returning our children to school is challenging, especially when last year's fees was not cleared. And if you want to change schools for your child, the fees is high. You need all the requirements and paying at least half of the fees. And if you decide to take them back to the previous school, you have to clear old fees. And this term, fees has been increased a lot.
A survey indicates that tuition fees for a term across elite schools has shot up to about 3 million shillings per student at secondary school and 1.3 million shillings across primary schools. At the traditional schools, secondary schools are charging about 1 million shillings a term, while primary schools are charging about 800,000 shillings a term. Schools charge a raft of other expenses, including development fees, functional fees, parents and teachers association fees, examination fees, and uniform fees.
Why should children be taking bags of cement to school? Why should the school require me to take a triple-decker to school when I can only sleep on one bed? Isn't that business? And is this what we are reducing education to?
Parents in the lower rungs of the social strata can only afford to send their children to UPE and USC schools, which operate on shoestring budgets, receiving an annual capitation grant for each learner at primary level of 20,000 shillings, 174,000 shillings at O level, and 255,000 shillings at A level. An education expert at National Planning Authority, Hamis Mugendawala, has previously said that to be able to improve the quality of education, the capitation grants ought to be raised to 63,000 shillings at primary school, 530,000 shillings at O level, and 885,000 shillings at A level. The right to basic education is provided for in Article 30 and 34(2) of the Constitution, which calls for the right to basic education for every Ugandan. But the quality of free education is beyond the pale.
We are not going to reduce education to a commodity, because it is not a commodity, it is a right. Education is not McDonald's, it is not KFC. It is a right, it is an empowerment right. That a child can come from this background, and education can lift them out of that cycle of poverty.
Nabwame says that Sections 3 and 57 of the Education Act empower the Education and Sports Minister to intervene.
To compel me to buy those things from the school at even a price that is higher than the market is dire exploitation, and government has a duty to be able to protect us from that exploitation. There are so many school requirements that schools are asking for, and it is totally out of order.
Past interventions by the Ministry of Education intended to regulate school fees have had little to no effect, which the leader of the opposition in Parliament, Joe Senyonyi, attributes to a conflict of interest.
They are slow or inactive when it comes to regulation because they are conflicted. Many of these ministers, many of these government officials have got schools of their own, and that's why they cannot regulate, play that regulatory role, because it presses hard against them.
The unilateral decision to raise tuition is out of tandem with key metrics such as wages and household income if one were to interrogate the numbers from the 2019-2020 Uganda Bureau of Statistics National Household Survey. There are fears that this practice akin to education apartheid will likely amplify the social strata, fault lines, and income inequalities.
Aristotle said that we shouldn't privatize social services. If you privatize social services, you are going to bring two categories of citizens. Those ones who can afford and those ones who cannot afford. And it is a time bomb to have those two kinds of citizens. Because those ones who don't have, they will attack those ones who have.
The survey indicated that the median or average monthly wage for a public servant was 526,000 shillings, while a private employee earned 150,000 shillings. The highest paid employees were the managers, earning a median monthly income of 580,000 shillings, while the least paid were elementary workers, earning an average of 100,000 shillings.
You're condemning children and they're dropping out of school because they can't pay the cost. To some people, this might seem as small money, but you're going to find someone. What is the average children that a Ugandan person has?
The household survey indicates that the average size of a Ugandan family is 5.6 children. To draw a hypothesis, if a parent has 2 children in an elite primary school and 2 in an elite secondary school, he or she will have to part with about 7.6 million shillings a term as tuition fees. This does not include other costs such as expenditure on health, food, utilities, and transport, among others. The average monthly wage of 150,000 shillings for those in the private sector may only be enough to purchase a school uniform for a child studying in an elite primary school. The other valuable data set for this analysis is household income. The household survey evaluates incomes received both in kind and cash from agriculture, wage employment, income from non-agricultural enterprises, property incomes, transfers, and organizational support, among others. The survey indicates that the median monthly household income in Uganda by 2020 was 190,000 shillings. Nearly 90% of the population by 2020 earned less than 830,000 shillings as monthly income. A 2022 survey from the Bank of Uganda indicates that only 1% of Ugandans earn more than 1 million shillings monthly, out of a working population of 22.8 million. Consumption expenditure per household, which is the amount spent by households on food and non-food items such as utility bills, adjusted for inflation, is another indicator that could be instructive in analyzing tuition fees. The average monthly consumption expenditure per household increased from 324,288 shillings in 2016-2017 to 339,263 shillings in 2019-2020, representing an annualized growth rate of 1.4%. So if the monthly consumption expenditure is 339,263 shillings, against the average monthly wage for a public servant, which is 526,000 shillings, it means that a household will only be left with 186,737 shillings to spend on tuition fees. According to the survey, in urban areas, the number of people living below the poverty line increased from 9.5% in 2016-2017 to 11% in 2019-2020, and the number of poor people increased from 900,000 in 2016-2017 to 1.3 million people in 2019-2020. In 2019-2020, 8.3 million people, representing 20.3% of the population, were estimated to be poor, of whom nearly 85% were in rural areas. In other words, 1 in 5 people are living below the official national poverty line. Of these, 41.8% are food poor and are unable to have a minimum income to meet their food needs. By their own accounts, many of Uganda's leading lights have benefited from access to affordable education. People such as Professor Gilbert Bukenya and the late Tumusime Mutebile were all beneficiaries of an affordable education regime. In today's Uganda, however, such social mobility is increasingly fraught with challenges in light of the rising cost of education.
Most of you, you are beneficiaries of a functional system. If it were not for that system, many of you wouldn't be here. And it is the truth. If you look at most of our policymakers, people in parliament, they are beneficiaries of a functional public system. Many of them wouldn't be in that parliament.
This category of persons usually educate their children at UPE and USC schools. A large number of Ugandans, estimated at 41%, live below the global poverty estimate of $1.90 per day and are condemned into a vicious cycle of generational poverty and spatial inequalities as their offspring are excluded from well-paying, white-collar jobs. In stark contrast, the offspring of wealthy families who attain higher education get well remunerated in jobs with high incomes and perks such as better medical care. These inequalities are illustrated in the 2019-2020 survey that revealed that the consumption expenditure of the richest 10% was twice as much as that of the bottom 40%.